Canada just got a wake-up call that nobody saw coming. And it happened not in Ottawa, not in Washington, but on the gleaming floors of Wall Street. Prime Minister Mark Carney didn't fly south to shake hands with the American president. He bypassed the White House entirely and walked straight into the boardrooms of America's most powerful financial titans. And here's the jaw-dropping part. Those titans? They want in. American CEOs, the people who control trillions of dollars in capital, are now openly signaling that Canada is where they want to do business. If you think this is just another routine diplomatic visit, you need to keep watching, because what unfolded in New York over the past few days could completely rewrite the economic relationship between Canada and the United States, and it directly affects your job, your savings, and your future. Stay with me, because this story is moving fast, and the implications are enormous. Before we go any further, if you're new here and you care about what's really happening in Canada's economy and politics, hit that subscribe button right now and tap the like button. We cover the stories that actually matter to Canadians and to anyone watching Canada's rise on the world stage. Now let's get into this. Mark Carney is not a typical politician, and he has never pretended to be one. This is a man who ran the Bank of Canada during the 2008 financial crisis and was credited with keeping this country's banking system the most stable in the entire developed world. He then went on to run the Bank of England during Brexit, one of the most economically turbulent periods in British history. He has sat across the table from heads of state, central bankers, hedge fund managers, and sovereign wealth fund directors. He speaks the language of global capital fluently, and Wall Street knows it. So when Mark Carney decided that his first major international move as Prime Minister would not be a trip to Washington to stand beside Donald Trump for a photo opportunity, but instead a direct engagement with America's financial and business elite, that was not an accident. That was a calculated, strategic decision, and it is already paying dividends. Let's set the scene properly. The relationship between Canada and the United States right now is complicated in ways that would have seemed unthinkable just a few years ago. Tariffs that were supposed to be temporary have lingered. Trade tensions that were supposed to de-escalate have instead deepened. The rhetoric coming from certain corners of Washington has been aggressive, dismissive, and at times outright hostile toward Canada. Words like 51st state have been thrown around not as jokes, but as policy suggestions. And through all of that, Canada has been searching for the right response. Not one born out of anger or reactionary politics, but one that actually works. Carney's Wall Street gambit appears to be exactly that kind of response. What Carney essentially did was go around the political noise and speak directly to the people who actually move American economic policy in ways that no elected official fully can, the business community. Because here is a truth that gets lost in political coverage all the time. American CEOs, major financial institutions, and the investment community have enormous influence over how Washington behaves on trade. When America's own corporate leaders start telling their government that tariffs on Canada are hurting their supply chains, their profits, and their shareholders, the calculation in Washington changes. Carney understood this. And so, instead of flying to the White House to be photographed in a position of supplication, he flew to New York and began building a coalition of American business interests who have every reason to want Canada treated as the essential economic partner it has always been. The meetings that took place were not ceremonial. These were substantive conversations with the kind of people who run companies that employ hundreds of thousands of Americans and Canadians alike. Financial giants, tech leaders, energy executives, infrastructure investors, the kind of people whose phone calls get returned in Washington before almost anyone else's. And what Carney brought to those meetings was a pitch, a vision of Canada not as a junior partner asking for favors, but as a sovereign economic powerhouse offering a stable, resource-rich, highly skilled, and strategically positioned opportunity for American capital. Canada has the critical minerals, that the global green energy transition desperately needs. Canada has the land, the water, the energy infrastructure, and the workforce. Canada has the rule of law, the financial stability, and the regulatory predictability that investors love. Carney walked into those rooms and said, "You need us as much as we need you, and here is exactly why doubling down on that partnership makes you money." And the response, according to multiple reports from people in and around those meetings, was genuinely enthusiastic. American CEOs are not sentimental about trade relationships. They are not nostalgic for NAFTA for emotional reasons. They care about supply chains, cost structures, risk profiles, and return on investment. And what they heard from Carney apparently resonated on all of those fronts. There are now serious conversations happening about expanded investment frameworks, about joint ventures in the critical minerals sector, about financial cooperation that would deepen the integration of Canadian and American capital markets in ways that benefit both countries enormously. These are not press release conversations. These are the kinds of conversations that lead to signed agreements and announced investments. Now let's talk about why this moment is so significant historically, because context matters here. Canada has always had a complicated dance with American economic power. We are neighbors. We are allies. We are each other's largest trading partners. And yet that relationship has always carried with it an undercurrent of asymmetry. The United States is 10 times larger by population and by economic output. That size differential has historically meant that Canada was the one doing more of the accommodating, more of the adjusting, more of the diplomatic softening. Previous Canadian governments, regardless of their political stripe, often found themselves in the position of reacting to American decisions rather than shaping them. What Carney is attempting, and what the Wall Street visit represents, is a fundamental shift in that dynamic. Canada is not reacting. Canada is leading. Canada is not waiting for Washington to set the terms. Canada is going directly to the people who fund Washington and making its case there first. This is sophisticated diplomatic and economic statecraft, and it is worth appreciating for what it is. Think about the geometry of the situation. If you are a major American CEO and you have just spent an hour with the Canadian Prime Minister hearing about investment opportunities in critical minerals, clean energy infrastructure, financial services, and technology, and that same Prime Minister has made it crystal clear that Canada has options, that Canada is actively courting European capital, Asian sovereign wealth funds, and domestic investment. Suddenly, the idea of your government slapping punishing tariffs on that country starts to look like a bad business decision rather than just a political argument. Carney is turning Canada's trade vulnerability into leverage by demonstrating that Canadian opportunity is real, that the competition for access to that opportunity is real, and that American businesses that ignore it will be handing advantages to their competitors. The critical minerals piece of this story deserves particular attention because it is the part that is reshaping geopolitics right now in real time. The world is in the middle of a massive energy transition. Electric vehicles, battery storage, solar panels, wind turbines, advanced semiconductors, all of these technologies require specific minerals that are not evenly distributed around the planet. Lithium, cobalt, nickel, copper, rare earth elements. Canada has significant deposits of virtually all of them. The United States has been extremely aggressive in recent years about trying to secure supply chains for these materials, partly out of genuine industrial policy motivation, and partly out of concern about dependence on China, which currently dominates the processing and refining of many critical minerals. Canada sits in an absolutely extraordinary strategic position in this landscape, a friendly, stable, democratic neighbor with vast mineral wealth and the infrastructure to develop it. Carney walked into Wall Street carrying that card, and he played it skillfully. What is also worth noting is what was happening simultaneously on the Canadian domestic economic front while Carney was in New York. There has been a significant conversation happening inside Canada about economic sovereignty, about reducing dependence on the American market, about building internal trade and investment frameworks that make the Canadian economy more resilient regardless of what happens south of the border. The removal of interprovincial trade barriers, something that has been discussed in this country for literally decades, is suddenly moving with real momentum. The idea of building a more integrated national economy, where goods and services and workers move freely from British Columbia to Newfoundland without the friction of provincial regulations, is no longer a policy wonk talking point. It is becoming government policy. And that matters, because an economically more integrated Canada is a more powerful Canada at the negotiating table with anyone, including the United States. There is also a psychological dimension to what Carney is doing that is easy to miss if you're only looking at the economic numbers. Canada has spent the better part of the past year being talked about dismissively by American political figures. The 51st state rhetoric was not just insulting. It was demoralizing in a way that had a real effect on how some Canadians were thinking about their country's place in the world. Is Canada too small? Is Canada too dependent? Is Canada simply destined to orbit American power forever without ever really setting its own course? Carney's Wall Street visit is, among other things, a direct and emphatic answer to all of those questions. It says, no. Canada is a serious economic player. Canada's Prime Minister does not need to stand in a receiving line at the White House. Canada goes where the real conversations are happening and holds its own at the highest level. That message matters domestically just as much as it matters internationally. The reaction from Canada's business community has been notably positive. There is a sense, and you can hear it in the commentary from Canadian executives and economists, that finally, Canada has leadership at the federal level that truly understands how global capital works and how to use that understanding in Canada's national interest. Carney's background is not a liability in these conversations. It is his greatest asset. He is not a politician who studied economics. He is an economist and a central banker who became a politician. And that distinction is enormous when you are sitting across from the CEO of a major American investment bank or energy company. He speaks their language, he understands their concerns, and he can make the case for Canada in terms that resonate with the people who actually make the decisions that shape economic reality. Let's also be honest about the risks and the complications here, because this story is not without its tensions. There are Canadians, and their concerns are legitimate, who worry about the implications of deepening ties with American capital, even as political relations are strained. If American corporations invest more heavily in Canadian critical minerals, in Canadian energy, in Canadian financial infrastructure, does that create new forms of dependency? Does that give Washington new leverage over Ottawa in ways that could be used coercively? These are real questions, and they deserve serious answers. Carney's position, as best as can be inferred from his public statements and the direction of his policy, seems to be that the answer lies in diversification. Yes to American investment, but also yes to European investment, yes to Asian investment, yes to building Canadian domestic capital capacity. The goal is not to replace American economic partnership with something else. The goal is to ensure that Canada is never in a position where any single external actor has so much leverage that Canadian sovereignty becomes negotiable. That is a sensible strategic framework, even if executing it is enormously complex. And then there is the political dimension back home. Canada just came through an election that Carney won in part by positioning himself as the leader who could navigate the turbulent waters of the Canada-US relationship better than anyone else. The Liberal Party's victory was significantly shaped by Canadian voters' desire for a steady, experienced hand on the economic tiller at a moment of genuine uncertainty. The Wall Street visit is Carney delivering on that promise in real time. He is showing Canadians that his approach to the relationship with the United States is not passive, not defensive, and not deferential. It is active, strategic, and grounded in a sophisticated understanding of where power actually resides in the global economic system. What happens next is going to be fascinating to watch. The signals coming from the American business community following Carney's visit are being read closely by people in Washington. When major American corporations start signaling that they want a smoother trade relationship with Canada, when their lobbying dollars and their boardroom conversations start pushing in that direction, the political calculus in the Trump administration around Canadian tariffs and trade policy begins to shift. It does not shift overnight. It does not shift simply because of one set of New York meetings. But the direction of travel matters, and right now the direction of travel is toward a potential recalibration of the Canada-US trade relationship on terms that are significantly more favorable to Canada than where things stood even 6 months ago. The story of Mark Carney going to Wall Street instead of Washington is, at its deepest level, the story of Canada choosing to fight on the terrain where it is strongest. Canada cannot outmuscle the United States politically. Canada cannot outspend Washington in lobbying or military power. But Canada can outcompete anyone when it comes to demonstrating value to the global investment community. Canada can show that it is stable when others are volatile, that it is open when others are closing, that it is rich in exactly the resources the 21st century economy needs most. That is the game Carney is playing, and based on everything we know about how it has gone so far, he is playing it very well indeed. We are living through a genuinely historic moment in Canada's relationship with the world and with its closest neighbor. The old assumptions are being challenged. The old dynamics are shifting. And Canada, for perhaps the first time in a generation, is not waiting for permission to define itself on its own terms. Whether you agree with every decision Carney makes, whether you voted for his party or not, this particular move, the Wall Street move, deserves to be understood and appreciated for the strategic intelligence it represents. Canada is in the room. Canada is making its case, and America's most powerful business leaders are listening. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Carney made the right call by going to Wall Street before Washington? Do you think this approach will actually move the needle on tariffs and trade? Or do you think the real decisions will always get made in Washington regardless of who Canada talks to on Wall Street? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. This is exactly the kind of conversation that needs to happen, and your perspective genuinely matters. And if you found this breakdown valuable, please share this video with someone who cares about Canada's economy and its place in the world. Every share helps us reach more Canadians and more people around the world who are paying attention to this extraordinary moment. Thank you for watching, thank you for staying with this story all the way through, and we will see you in the next one.